Welcome to Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Lantern Voices. My name is Louisa, and I'll be your host for this episode with author Emma Hakansson. She wrote the book Subhuman, published here by us at Lantern, and she's also the author of How Veganism Can Save Us, her first book, which was not published by us, but definitely worth a read as well. She is a dedicated advocate working to upheave oppression, facing our fellow animals, children, women, and working people. And that's what Subhuman is all about. We were talking about the intersectionality of oppression, so how the idea of oppression permeates all of the oppressing peoples and species. As always, if you stay with her here until the end of the episode, you will get 25% off the ebook of Subhuman, all right? So not the physical copy. Unfortunately, we don't have control of the sales of those copies, but the ebook store is managed by us here at Lantern, so we are able to give you a discount, a 25% off discount, if you want to read Subhuman or any book ever featured here, Season 1, Season 2, your choice. You'll head over to lanternpm.org and hit our ebook store over there. There is a little side part that says featured in a podcast. All of those books, the coupon that you're going to get at the end of the episode will be applicable, right? So without further ado, let's welcome Emma Hakansson to Lantern Voices. Hi, Emma. Welcome to Lantern Voices.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to chat.
Thank you for joining us here today. And since our first question is an introductory question, I will start right off with it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Can you introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners? We've met at your book launch in New York City. I think that was 2023 already.
2024, maybe? Who knows? Time is
it's been a
concept I've lost grasp of. Yeah.
Well, it's been at least like a couple of years. And I've met you there. I got to know a little bit of your friends, a little bit of people that care about you, and a little bit about your work. But our listeners don't know you yet. So how was your journey in activism? How did you get where you are today? Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes. So I am Emma Hakansson. Hello. I am an author, which is why I'm here. I've written 3 books. The most recent that I wrote is Subhuman, which Lantern has very kindly published. And all of the books relate to speciesism and social justice. One of them relates to those themes specifically in relation to fashion, because I also run a charity, Collective Fashion Justice, which helps move towards a total ethics fashion system where people, animals, and planet are protected over profit. And we're really focused on shifting fashion beyond the use of animal-derived materials. And I also work in child sexual abuse prevention, just because I also focus on that. And all of those things to me are actually very connected, which I feel like we'll talk about more later. But I started my activism specifically focused on animal rights. I first made the connection that I myself was speciesist, even if I didn't know the term yet, when I was 14 and I was living with my family in Sweden. I'm half Swedish. And I was offered moose, and it's very normal to eat moose and deer in Sweden, whereas in Australia, we don't have those animals there. I had never considered eating those animals, and I was actually excited to hopefully see them in Sweden. And so that sort of made me feel very weird and uncomfortable, and that made me realize it was inconsistent and illogical for me to be upset about eating this one animal, but then I would merrily go and eat another animal. So that was how I started thinking about it, and then I just very quickly went from becoming vegan to going to a march to close off slaughterhouses, and then meeting some people who were working and volunteering with Animal Liberation Victoria. So I quickly went into slaughterhouse vigils and then doing some like undercover investigative work and campaigning. And my interest in fashion started to merge with this, and I realized I could really hopefully make change in a fashion space for animals. But also I realized more and more that the entirety of the animal rights movement is not necessarily as interested as I am in associating itself with and building bridges with other social justice movements. And so my charity aims to do that better, hopefully. And it's something that is a really strong theme in my book, Subhuman, as well. So here we are.
And I find that very inspiring. I think for me and for those who are listening, I assume that our listeners are mission aligned because of the topic that we discussed in the podcast. But we all have that moment that we realize that animals are sentient, that humans are animals, and we're all one thing. And why do we eat one and care for another? That's the perfect segue for saying that's apologies to our listeners if you hear dog barking in the background. My neighbor has a cute little dog named George, and he likes to express himself.
He will not be silenced.
He will not be silenced, especially during podcast recordings. But yeah, why do we care for dogs and cats, and why do we eat other animals? And yet, few of us go immediately to protest in front of slaughterhouses and become activists in a larger scale, like more than our homes and our families. So I think that is very inspiring about our trajectory.
I think also it just was, I don't know, I think I was very motivated to do something, like I realized I could do something with how I ate. And then I realized that was also true for what I wore. And then I realized, my time was something that I had. And at the time I was still in school, I didn't have a full-time job or anything. So I had more of it. And I think the fact that I got into the movement when I was quite young helped me then realize that I wanted to make my work in my adult life be strongly associated with the movement because, we spend so much of our day working. And so why not make that work associated with this movement?
So I think now we can start talking about your book. And I would love to start by the title because it's a very appealing title and a title that says a lot. The book is called Subhuman, and it's referring to the idea that non-human animals are inferior to humans. Why do you want to highlight this concept in the title? When you were writing the book, what thought came through when picking the title?
I wanted to call it subhuman because subhuman is a term that we don't just prescribe to other animals beyond humans, right? Often you hear people speak about people who maybe they consider evil or acting in a particularly bad way as subhuman, but also we have a lot of different forms of oppression within humans where we essentially categorize certain humans as subhuman. And that's talked about in the book that, racist ideology is based on this idea of only some people truly having humanity. And Christopher Sebastian, who I reference in the book, speaks about that a lot, has a really good lecture on it, where, the people who are considered most human are basically white men. And there's all of the bad science where we've talked about, like, the peak of evolution being whiteness and being male as well, sexism, all of that kind of thing. And so I wanted to have that be the central theme, really, of the book, because all of these hierarchies, whether it be between people of different races, of different genders, or between species, are things that we've just made up. Like, they're not inherent to the universe. And it's really important that we see them as one structure of oppression, because that is when we can start to see that we're not just like aligning veganism and animal rights with other social justice movements. It is one social justice movement that ultimately should have the same goal of, if we want genuine equality and anti-oppression, we should be considering that without any gender-based or racial-based or species-based boundaries. So that's the idea for the title.
Intersectionality of oppression is something that you talk a lot about in the book, and you started talking about in this conversation today. I'm going to add a little extra question here. Why do you think the movement doesn't talk about intersectionality of oppression enough?
I think that the movement for animals is still a part of a wider system that is, to a large degree, racist and sexist, right? Like, the animal rights movement is not free from the broader problems of the world. And so we have perpetuated them in this movement as well. And if we don't take greater effort to eliminate those forms of discrimination from the movement, which there are a lot of amazing people working to do that, then of course we're just going to perpetuate them. And that means that we have people that are maybe sometimes promoting veganism in a way that is very single-focused and single-minded. There's often people who will say, like, why are you talking about people, or why are you talking about the planet? It should only be about the animals, as though if you refer to the ways that animal exploitation intersect with other forms of harm, you're like minimizing our capacity to advocate for our fellow animals, when I don't think that's true at all. I think it strengthens our capacity to advocate for other animals, because, again, it's really important that we understand that these structures are linked, and it's maybe an easier way for us to invite more people to see the similarities between how they are harmed by different systems and how animals are harmed. Like, for me, part of the reason that I work in child sexual abuse prevention is because I'm a survivor of that. And I really think that that experience for me is probably a quite fundamental reason as to why I have the view of veganism and animal rights and the world that I do, because I have a strong understanding of what it means to have your autonomy be denied, to be viewed as, an object where someone else's pleasure and wants are prioritized so entirely above your well-being and your rights. And so I see massive parallel to other animals, and that's something I talk about in the book as well, the sexual exploitation of animals, particularly in dairy, in eggs, but for all animals, because we view their bodies literally as commodities. And so, to circle back, the point is that I think it's really often viewed as a weakening of the movement to speak to other issues, like we're diluting our capacity to speak on behalf of or to amplify the plight of animals. But I just don't think that's true at all. And I would like to hopefully change that perception.
Yes. And I'm glad that you brought the eggs and dairy example, because that ties up with what I want to know next is for folks who haven't read the book and for folks who maybe are not yet aware of the intersectionality of oppression, in the book you mentioned the example of the fight defended by feminism and the fight to end the exploitation of chickens, cows, and other animals that humans consume the milk. And I think that's very interesting, because the parallel that you draw in the book makes it very clear that the logic behind the exploitation of them is the same logic that feminism is fighting very hard against. So it's the exploitation of female bodies. Can you talk a little bit about that in more detail?
Yeah, well, I think, so the part that speaks to feminism as it relates to animal rights refers and opens with referencing Carol J. Adams and The Sexual Politics of Meat, which is very much on the high recommend list for reading, because the whole premise of the dairy industry and the egg industry relies upon viewing those female animals as essentially machinery to produce a product, similar to the way that, there's plenty of dystopian fiction now that unfortunately is looking quite similar to some parts of the real world now, where women are really considered, to a degree, machinery, in that we're considered as a primary purpose. We exist in order to reproduce, which in a way then makes children products, which is a whole other topic. But between women, between chickens who are laying eggs, and between dairy cows who are producing milk, that's the same thing. The body is the focus, and particularly the sexual organs are the focus and the interest. And so the individual who has those becomes of less interest. Their needs are irrelevant. And I think a lot of women can relate to the experience of, we even talk about feeling like a piece of meat. And if you're being catcalled, feeling as though you're only seen as like flesh and something that people are wanting to consume with their eyes or more so. And we don't necessarily realize that when we eat every day, we're perpetuating a very similar system, just
Mhm.
on a different species.
Absolutely. Yes. As a longtime vegetarian, that was one of the things that made me realize I wanted to move on and be vegan and not just
Mm,
vegetarian, because it is a cause that is very near and dear to my heart as well. So
yeah,
when I read that, and especially when I read in your book, it is very interesting because the argument that most vegetarians use is that, but nobody's dying. And we
which
already
is just a lack of knowledge.
yeah.
Which, until you know how those systems work, that egg-laying hens are killed when they're considered spent and no longer producing enough eggs, and the same in the dairy industry, that they're killed, not to mention that the males are killed because they will not fulfill those purposes.
Mhm.
People just don't know, and I think it goes to show how strong the cultural conditioning and the lobbying that helps to promote this myth making is. Like, I remember when I went vegan, I told my mum that, of course, a dairy cow has to have a pregnancy in order to then be lactating. Like, otherwise, why are they producing milk? And she was maybe 55, and she was like, "I cannot believe that I have come to this age and not realized that." But it's true for so many people that we just have placed this species in such a commodity, like, complex, that we don't consider that they function the same way that we do. Like, milk giving is a life source for a life who has been eliminated.
Yeah. Yes. And I that just occurred to me because one of our colleagues here, Megan, she is raising her kids vegan, and
Mm,
they're very young, they're babies, and the oldest one is learning to speak, and they're
mm.
trying to figure out a way at this moment how to make sure that she knows and is aware of what the world calls animals when you go to a restaurant, when she starts going to school,
Mm,
because so she doesn't make them like mistake or somebody tries to feed her something that she doesn't need. But also so she's aware in a proper way for a child of what's
I'm
going
not
on.
gonna traumatize her immediately, yeah.
Exactly. But at the same time, not calling the animals by the byproduct names that people call them. So
Mm,
it was so interesting when she was telling me because I know vegans who became vegan later in life. I don't know anybody who was raised vegan. And
mm.
it is very challenging to how do you explain that to a child without first traumatizing the child, and second, not perpetuating the terms that the industry wants us to use to dissociate from the exploitation that they're doing.
Mm. Which I think, like, I find children so interesting in so many ways because they are more kind of aware of fundamental truths in a way, because they've not been pushed out of them, because there's so much messaging that pushes them out. Um, and it was similar for me. I had seen ducks in a park one day and came home and it was duck for dinner, and I was really upset. And at the time, my dad, not really thinking about it, just thinking that my mum had made this dinner and he wanted me to eat it, was like, "Oh, it's just cold duck. It's not the same thing." Um, and then on the other side, I have a friend who has a child who is born and raised vegan, and she's maybe like 5 now, and she got in trouble at school because someone had a ham sandwich in the class, and she was like, "That's a pig, right?" And she upset the other child, but it's like, this child was not doing anything wrong, she was just sharing a fact, but that fact is upsetting, and I just find it a really interesting thing, the way that you have to explore that, and that that child should have the right to,
Mhm.
share the truth and talk about it because it is important to them.
At Lantern Publishing and Media, we love working with authors who are deeply aligned with causes that matter. Many of them are passionate about animals. One of those authors is Cheryl Moss. Lantern is proud to have published 3 of Cheryl's children's books, Gabriel, Cluck, and Pickle. Each story highlights an animal who escaped factory farming and found safety and care at a sanctuary. Cheryl is committed to shining a spotlight on the plight of animals. Not only does she do that by writing her books and sharing her books, she also does it as the host of the Better Life for Animals podcast. If you care about animals and want to hear real stories from sanctuary founders, team members, board members, and volunteers, be sure to tune in. Several Lantern authors have been on the show, so you might encounter some familiar voices out there. Visit betterlifeforanimals.com/podcast to start listening. Again, that's betterlifeforanimals.com/podcast. Still tied to the idea that we were saying, if you mentioned that a friend's child got in trouble at school for basically stating facts, if it was an adult, they would be in so much trouble for
Yeah.
basically stating the facts for a child. They're not wrong. And I think one of the things that I sometimes worry about my siblings is that because I was already a vegetarian when they were born, like when they asked stuff, nobody tried to sugarcoat or anything. They were just saying who the animals were.
Mm,
Didn't care, so that really bothered me. But
mm. But I think there's also something in that there's the difference between stating the factual truth of, yes, when we talk about eating beef, we're talking about eating a cow, as compared to inviting a child to consider what that actually means. Not in terms of let's talk about in graphic detail what happens in a slaughterhouse, but what does it mean for a cow to become a food? Yes, that animal had to die.
Mhm.
This animal lived in a way very similar to the dog that you know or to the cat you know, in that they have the same feelings. How do you feel about that? Like, there's a big difference, I think, between just stating a
Yeah.
fact in that very brief way as compared to inviting a child to, or anyone, to consider
Mhm.
their own morality, which I think, you know, that's one of the things with the book and with the way I try to engage with people is just to, I think books are really important because it gives people a space to consider how they feel themselves, because books are so personal and private, like it's just you in there. um, so yeah, I think that's all I
Yeah.
have to
No,
say.
okay, that makes sense. That makes sense because I could never get away whenever I was trying to give them more empathetic lesson, then my parents would catch me, and that would be a problem for me, so
Yeah, and they're like wanting that to not happen for a reason, right? Because they probably sense that that might cause some changes and be complex.
and one child is enough. So Lantern Publishing and Media is a book publisher devoted to animal rights. You can keep up with all the news about our latest books, get tips on veganism, inspirational quotes, and much more by following us on social media. We are at Lantern PM on Instagram and Blue Sky, at Lantern PM Official on TikTok, and Lantern Publishing and Media on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Consider giving us a follow if you are on any of the social media channels. It really helps us grow our community and reach more people, sharing your message with the world. All the links are on the episode description. You mentioned about this, I think we can call it an ideology,
Mhm,
carnism, when it
mhm.
perpetrates society. One of the people you interviewed for the book was also author Melanie Joy, who developed, I believe, this
Yes,
idea and the term, not the idea, but like the definition.
coined the
Carnism.
term and yeah.
Yes. And carnism perpetrates all parts of society. And in your book, it's very clear that they're mostly white doctors in the field research who were dealing with animals, mice, in the laboratory. And they're also lower income immigrant BIPOC workers in slaughterhouses. All that, all different parts of society. And from what you tell in the book, the impact of carnism in these different demographics is very different. Some doctors ended up becoming vegans after exploiting the animals and realizing what they were doing. And they were like, no, this is not what I should be doing. This goes against my professional oath. Or any sorts of ethics realizations that they have. But when you describe the slaughterhouse workers, they are being progressively more desensitized. And there's, in my opinion, obviously an economical aspect. One side
A
has the
huge one.
financial security, has citizenship security, perhaps. Depends on the country, but still. And the other side doesn't. So, do you think there are ways that veganism can support the fight for equality in this case as well?
Yeah, I think this is when it comes back to what I was saying before of we will have a stronger animal rights movement if we have a stronger human rights movement.
Hmm.
Um, you know, yes, we could spend time arguing about is it true or not that veganism is cheaper or is it actually more expensive? Or we could advocate that everyone is paid a living wage. And if everyone was paid a living wage for their work, regardless of that work, they would have more time on their hands to think about their morality and the choices that they want to make and to be more comfortable to actually live in alignment with those values. And I think, when it comes to slaughterhouses and work like this that is inherently traumatizing, like I talk about in the book, perpetration-induced traumatic stress, which is not uncommon for slaughterhouse workers to experience, which is like PTSD, but from inflicting the trauma rather than suffering it yourself. Um, no one wants that job. Like, no one dreams as a child of being a slaughterhouse worker. That doesn't happen. And so it is a job that comes out of necessity and hardship, economic hardship, lack of other options. I talk in the book about Canada at one point offered express entry for refugees only if they would work in a slaughterhouse because they were facing shortage of workers because no one wants to do that work. And so, again, like, it's so important for us to consider that these different issues are interconnected, and that will help us to strengthen the movement for animals. Um, and I also think ultimately, in a way, often the animal rights movement has an issue with extending compassion to those who are both suffering under the system of speciesism, even if they are humans, like slaughterhouse workers who experience perpetration-induced traumatic stress, but who also are cogs in that machine, right? Like, I think a lot of people, and especially actually in relation to this book, because I interviewed Craig Whitney, who was previously a slaughterhouse worker, and a lot of people had some issues with that, and that, you're sort of uplifting someone who's done this terrible thing. Um, but I actually don't think it's any different or fair to demonize someone for working in a slaughterhouse as though it's different from the fact that I've eaten so many animals in my life before I became vegan. I have no idea how many. I just had the privilege of being removed from the process. I just got, you know, the benefit supposedly of it, whereas someone like him had to be a part of the process. So I think the movement could be better at extending compassion and seeing that just kind of attacking and criticizing people who are, yes, in some ways a part of the problem, um, seeing them as people who we need to extend an arm to instead of fight, I think would get us a bit further, a bit faster.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of empathy that moves
Love
me.
that idea.
So I think I mentioned that on your book launch because that part already stuck with me when I read the book for the first time for the book.
Mm,
How I've never heard the perspective of slaughterhouse workers before, and how
mm,
they, like many in the movement, had this idea that they were the big villains in the story, and then
mm,
realized that they're probably underpaid workers living in a situation that, again, when I was consuming animals, I had the privilege to be detached of.
mm,
I was inflicting just as much harm.
Were you paying for that work to happen? Like, that's what we all were doing.
Supporting that system. And it is, now that you mentioned, a perfect example of the intersectionality of the movement and how it will benefit the entire movement if we have workers that can choose where to work, that can have the financial security of saying, I don't want to work there. Why Canada had to bring immigrants? Why Canada had to bring people that would be willing to do um, immigrants for this specific situation. Like, why
Mm,
we had to bring people to work there because the citizens that have built wealth in the country didn't want it. So they needed people who wanted to start again, who wanted to start building wealth, who wanted to start creating a better future for their families, to be willing to do something that goes against how the human brain is wired, I would like to believe.
Totally. And that's again when this term subhuman comes in, because essentially we've gone the pigs, the cows, the chickens who are in slaughterhouses because we've designed this building to kill them, to turn them into products. They are deemed subhuman. But so too is the group of people who the broader society has essentially considered an underclass. And so they should do that work. We don't want to do that work. And that's how we deem them subhuman and refer to them versus us. But kind of eliminating that line that we've made up is so important to unpacking it all.
Precisely. Yes. And there is a lot of discussion amongst the authors that come to the podcast whether or not veganism is a movement that is still strict to a bubble or if it's starting to burst out of the bubble and become mainstream. When we had Pei Feng Su a couple of months ago, she mentioned that. I don't know. Have you heard that episode?
No, I haven't yet. I just really like Pei and her work. She's amazing.
Yeah. So she's constantly right. Yes. She did say, no, veganism is very mainstream. The animal rights fight is very mainstream. And she goes on about why that isn't reality that she experienced and the things that she's seeing in the world. So very nice episode to all of you listeners if you haven't heard it yet. After this
I will also be joining.
Go there. It's an amazing episode. But yeah, and you also mentioned in the book something about the movement becoming mainstream. And there's a specific quote I would like us to talk about here. That is, when we promote a vegan diet without taking the time to raise awareness of speciesism itself, inevitably some symptoms of the oppressive system continue. So there is an argument here, the way I interpret it, of making veganism even more mainstream, of bursting this bubble. How do you think we can amplify vegan conversations in the mainstream environment while still raising awareness of speciesism?
So I think, part of it is about making sure that we are clear as a movement on the definition of veganism, because veganism in the mainstream is understood as a diet preference as compared to a lifestyle bound by a moral code and a view that animals do not exist for us or to be products, but exist alongside us, and that it is about much more than just what you eat, but also what you wear, but also just this understanding of our fellow animals. So what I mean when I say that there's this danger of promoting veganism in a way where we continue to perpetuate speciesism is if we only talk about diet change, we only say, the egg industry is bad and the dairy industry is bad, and here's why. That's obviously super important, but I think it's important for us to have a theoretical framework around that, which veganism is a part of, but veganism in its full ideology as compared to the way that it's been mainstreamed, which is very different. For example, it's why, there may be people who are vegan, consider themselves vegan, but buy a dog. And it's because that is not considered relevant to mainstream veganism. But it is, of course, because this is a dog who has also been made into a commodity who can be traded and bought in a system where, again, similar to dairy, they had a mother and they were separated from them in order for that pet trade to persist. So it's not, my gripe is not that veganism doesn't kind of encompass anti-speciesism. It's that the way it's been mainstreamed has eroded so much of the important theoretical component of veganism.
Mm-hmm. I think the tricky part is how to make a serious discussion like that seems easy to swallow on like an Instagram reel, or it's such a complex movement with so many complexities behind it and everything is interconnected. And the way that we are spreading information in bulks now kind of makes it hard to go in depth about things.
Yeah, which I think partly it's that we should not be exclusively relying on those modes of communication, right? Like, why bother writing a book now I think it's because it's important and people need time to consider ideas in a deeper format than one can in 90 seconds. Like, I think we can't let ourselves just only look that way or we're doomed. Um, but also, I think that social media is very powerful. It's certainly not to say that you shouldn't only speak about specific industries. Like, I run a charity that is all about speaking about specific industries and types of animal exploitation, but it's important to do so in a way that has like a breadcrumb trail to invite people back to the wider ideology. Instead of a great example is if you're advocating for the end of the fur trade, right? A lot of people don't wear fur now because we have moved forward in society to the point where it's very, very mainstream to consider that cruel. And there's this idea that to kill animals specifically for fashion is unacceptable. And that's really important, but it's important to invite people to see that this is one part of a broad spectrum of different kinds of exploitation as compared to like speaking about the fur trade in a way that doesn't encourage any further consideration. Because you could just say fur is cruel, the end. Or you could say fur is cruel, but use language that speaks about animals and sentience and someone's right to their own body, and to not be considered a commodity in a way that, kind of broadens the discussion, even if it's just kind of in the back of someone's head. Because it's important to have specific campaigns from the perspective of like change making, policy making, that kind of thing. But I think the two can coexist.
Absolutely. And I actually put between quote marks because I think I'm going to use to promote this episode. I love what you said about we need to consider ideas that
For more than 90 seconds.
for the 90 seconds, exactly.
Please.
Because yes, we are consuming so much social media and it is made to make us addicted. It is made to make us not want to stop scrolling that feed. But we have podcasts that go in depth. We have books. We are a book publisher. We have books that talk
And
about.
how can social media encourage someone to want to go deeper instead of just being like, and that's all I need to know on that?
Exactly. Which, as somebody who's working with social media, they're also making it harder and harder with the whole idea of closed loop, that to keep people, the algorithm favors nowadays content that keeps people there, that don't link anywhere else, that don't tell you to go check more somewhere else. So we are going against the flow here, but we are trying our best.
Yeah, we've got to do it.
Would you like to be one of the first to know about Lantern books, author events, and more? Then sign up for our newsletter. We deliver it only once a month, so you don't have to worry about overflowing your inbox with emails. We curate our newsletter with the latest Lantern news, but we also try to add information about partner organizations. That way, you can get to know about a new sanctuary or other activist organization every month. Go to the link on the episode description to know more. In the chapter, or should I say the part of the book that says the time is now, you talk about the importance of acting now, how the world and the environment and the animals are out of time. We don't get the luxury of waiting for another generation. We have to act now.
Yes.
What actions can we take now? Also, you talk a little bit about the grassroots movements. So if you can talk a little about what they are, who they are, all that.
I think so. I think it is really important for us to consider our capacity and what we want to do. And so, we've talked about diet, all of those things, veganism as an individual choice. But I really think what's important is for us to build community. And that is also where the grassroots movement comes in, because it is all about community and communities of people coming together to build people power for the movement, for animals, for other interlinked social justice issues. And, it's that whole quote, can't remember who said it, everyone says it, but, that there's this idea that like a few people, one person can't change the world, but indeed it's all that has ever changed anything. Like, we really are not going to get anywhere unless we acknowledge the strength of people unified. And that's not to say that politics isn't important. These things are important. Like, these systems and institutions are important, but it's critical that we don't think we as people have lost our capacity to engage with them. That's when democracy dies, and we're seeing it happen now. And I speak quite a lot in the book about like radical revolutionaries. Also, the idea that, you know, there are laws that are unjust. Perhaps that means sometimes those unjust laws need to be disobeyed. Um, you know, that's what the grassroots is about. Like, really, people saying this is unacceptable and we must do something about it. And I think for different people, their contribution will look different. It's not helpful to, you know, look to one type of activist or one type of person and think, well, I can't do that, so I can't really contribute to this movement. The, you know, the reason nature and ecosystems are so powerful is because of their diversity. And so if we have a movement that is diverse with different kinds of people with different interests and different skills, they'll bring different things. You know, it's why my fashion interest led me to advocating in the fashion space. Someone else may have a different particular interest, and then that builds like a larger constellation of actions for a collective cause.
I confess that the first time I heard about grassroots movement was when I started working at Lantern. And it took me a while because I think it's so common amongst activists to know what they are and what they're doing and where they are, that you kind of have to grasp by the flow and get the concept by going with the flow. Thinking in that spirit, if there's anybody who's just starting to reflect about veganism who ended up in this podcast because they were Googling the right terms, let's just say. What are exactly the grassroots movements? And if regular people who are just starting to get this empathy for the animals, if they want to get involved or if they want to start one, what should they do?
I mean, to me, the definition of grassroots movements is that they're purely people-powered movements and communities. Like, the idea is that it's the very base, right? What's just shooting out of the soil and building grass, the roots of the grass. Because we have very big charities and organizations that advocate for animals that, you know, are attached to very large funding players that are engaged with large institutions. And there's a lot of complexity in that. Grassroots is kind of very simple. It's just people who come together and decide to do something. So, like, Shack is an example. Carft is an example that fights against the fur trade. If people are most likely to kind of understand what grassroots is if you say, like, people protesting on the street. Protests are always, you know, normally coming from that cause. And so the best way to get involved in grassroots movements is to find and build community and find other people who think like you, not necessarily exactly like you, but where you have shared ideas and goals, and then you work together to expand. And I think that's something that we could do better as a movement as well. Like, maybe someone has a slightly different understanding of speciesism, or they are super on board with advocating for animals but haven't actually come fully to veganism yet. You should invite those people. You know, like, it's only going to strengthen someone's values to be included and invited into a community that cares about animals and that wants to end their oppression. Saying you're not, you know, enough to advocate for animals, I can't see how that helps anyone, really. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that you can do that and be inviting without accepting, like, diluting the message or the value system. There's a way to have both of those things at once.
Yes. And I can tell because I am going through this process myself of becoming vegan. And it's been a process that's is in the making for a little while. And I found when I moved from the United States back to Brazil, I was a little worried because I didn't remember how reliant on dairy is this part of the country that I live. So I couldn't find some of the meals I was starting, or some of the ingredients that I was starting to get used to. But luckily, there was a vegan market happening on one of the first weekends that I was back here, and I ended up thinking, I was like, I'm gonna go there and talk to people because they might know better. And,
Yeah.
and I did, and I ended up making some nice connections, some new friends, and I ended up also joining a WhatsApp group in which folks are constantly sending recommendations or, oh, I just tested like this product is new, just arrived. You should all try it. It's very good. And that's where I ended up finding a place for like a birthday cake that
Mm,
I had no idea where I would find something vegan for my birthday. Or I ended up texting, and I want a nutritionist, a professional that can help me out with this transition because when I became a vegetarian, that was very important for me. And
mm,
I want to do it right this time around as well. And they had plenty of professionals. Some of those professionals were in the group chat themselves because they were vegans as well. So it was this whole community that just gathered in this event, and they've been gathering in events like that and ended up finding each other and decided to start a group chat so
mm.
folks help each other.
Yeah, and, like, if it had been that, you must be vegan to be in this group, then someone who might learn in that group is not going to.
Mhm.
And I think there are lots of examples of even, like, my kind of earlier times in the movement where people showed me grace, and that was really important. Like, I speak in the book about a woman called Lizzie who unfortunately passed away not so long ago, who used to run Melbourne Chicken Save. And I was at a chicken slaughterhouse vigil, and I had seen this chicken who was, like, quite bloodied on their wings and on their feathers. And I went up to her and I kept saying, like, "It's bleeding and it's like this." And she was really gentle in saying, "We don't refer to animals as it, like, refer to them as they if you don't want to apply a specific gender." Um, but, animals are not objects, and so we talk about them not this way. And there's certainly a kind of more dominating form of engagement in some parts of the vegan movement that is much more like, you cannot make a mistake, and if you use this language, it's wrong, and if you do this, it's wrong, if you haven't got here, it's wrong. And I don't think that makes people feel comfortable to go deeper into the movement, because change is scary. We're not very good at it. And so if people around aren't encouraging of it as compared to, you need a bit of forgiveness. You're going to mess up sometimes. And that's not, yeah. I think I like to, whenever I'm speaking to someone who is not vegan or is not whatever, um, I try to remember the fact that 10 years ago, I was not vegan. And there were times where, I knew a vegan and I still thought it was weird. And I still, like, there were plenty of opportunities where maybe I should have, like, come to the realization sooner. And I didn't for whatever reason. I think no one can truly know exactly the recipe that got them to really understand the importance of refusing the oppression of other animals. Um, and so it's arrogant to think that you're going to know that for someone else. And you can only kind of invite people with information, and people are ultimately going to come to it themselves. And, I think it's important to be inviting.
I agree. And I think it's very humbling to think about your own past in this circumstance. I
Yeah.
recently was looking, for some reason, my phone, when I go to the incognito tab on the
Mm,
browser, I use that a lot for flights. When I go to the incognito part of the browser, there is a record on the bookmarks of all the pages that I saved on my computer, my teenage years computer.
mm,
I don't know how it got transferred there, kinda scary, but I ended up finding a blog that I had with my high school friends that we
mm,
posted, essays about what we thought, what our opinions were about the world, basically. But those
mm.
were views of, like, some 15, 16-year-olds in the early 2010s, and I
Probably different to the views you have now.
changed so much. I was looking at some essays, and I was like, "This person was awful." I mean, it was me.
Like, who is that girl? She has to be told something.
Yeah, it was like, what is going on here? But it was me, and it was me before I went to college. It was me before I got to properly experience the world as an adult and get out from under my parents' wings and be able to explore on my own and seeing things because the world also changed a lot in those years, but
Yeah.
seeing everything and understanding and thinking for myself. So, and I'm not saying that adults who are not vegans yet don't think for themselves. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I had less information, let's say, about veganism than I do now. And obviously,
Yeah.
my thoughts and opinions about that changed. Same
Mm.
with politics, intersectionality. There are some things that are straight on sexist that were written in those essays. I'm like, you're a girl. What are you talking about? But still, I didn't know. For me, that was normal.
Yeah. I found a picture of me and I'm like 16, 17. So I'm vegan at this point. And I'm at Edgar's Mission, which is an animal sanctuary in Australia. And I'm patting a cow. Um, and I'm wearing a jacket, a winter jacket that has a fur trim on it. And I didn't think it was faux fur, but I also didn't think it was fur. I literally just hadn't thought it. Like, it just had not occurred to me. And I'm so positive that people at the sanctuary would have looked at me and been like, that girl is wearing fur. And they wouldn't have loved it. I certainly would feel a bit weird about it if I was at the sanctuary and I saw that. But again, I was invited in to learn. And now I am here fighting at the European Commission for the fur trade to end. Like, maybe it would have been different if they just were like, get out of here. You don't get to learn. You don't get to connect with animals. Um, yeah, I think it's important for us to realize that we can be like radical and hardline on refusing animal oppression while still being like graceful and inviting.
Absolutely. And on that note, because I also want to be mindful of your time, is there anything that you like to tell our listeners about what you're working on at the moment, about any projects upcoming, anything that you would like to count with the community of listeners for support?
Hmm. I would really invite people to look at collective fashion justice and the charity because it's where most of my time is spent now. And we always have a lot of different campaigns going on to help move the fashion industry beyond animal derived materials. And sometimes that work doesn't seem necessarily exclusively or about animals because we're talking about methane emissions, or I directed and produced a film that is mostly about an Indigenous community in the Amazon rainforest recently. But that story and engaging with and supporting that community massively helps animals. That's called Sharinga. Maybe people want to watch that. It's via Collective Fashion Justice. But the point is, I would hope, let's see if that's true to people, that what I've talked about today around like intersectionality and the idea of collective liberation, um, that is expressed through the work that we do at CFJ. And there are so many different parts of animal exploitation that are not touched that could do with a similar approach, I think. So that's my invitation.
Thank you very much. And I will be sure to add those on the episode links here so folks can check it out and make it easier for anyone who's looking. After we turn out here, I'm gonna ask you for all the links.
Yes, yes.
That's okay,
Perfect.
right? All right. Emma, thank you very much for being here with us today. It was a pleasure talking to you again and chatting a little bit more about Subhuman. I think I have the book right here.
Yay. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, you're welcome to come back anytime and take care. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation with author Emma Hakansson. It was a pleasure to have her, and it's a pleasure to have you as our listener. I want to ask a huge favor. If you're listening to this episode on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, look for the like button, look for the subscribe button, look for the comments, and just drop a comment, share it with somebody that you care, somebody that you think will like this discussion that you just heard, and leave a 5-star rating if you like the podcast. It is very important to help us reach more and more people. We're so excited to see our audience grow. So if you can help us by sharing, rating, subscribing, clicking all the buttons, that will be amazing for us. Thank you very, very much. And as promised, here is your special discount coupon for the ebook of Subhuman or any other ebook ever featured here in the podcast. You head over to lanternpm.org, click on ebook store, and then feature it in the podcast. Select any book. If you want to do multiple books, it's fine as well. Just select any book in that page and then go to checkout. On checkout, there will be a blank field over there saying coupon. That's where you will type Lantern Voices 25. That is Lantern Voices, like the podcast name, and the numbers 2 and 5. This goes all together. You don't have to put any spaces in there. And that will give you a 25% off any ebook ever featured here in the podcast. So if you're getting just Subhuman, let's say, that will give you 25% off Subhuman. But if you decide to get Subhuman, The Red Planet, Vegan Made Easy, then all of that purchase will get 25% off in the end. All right. And if you want some spoilers of what's coming up, our ebook store should also have featured in the podcast the next episode. And this is one of the favorite books by our readers here at Lantern. We know based on sales and based on whenever we post about them on social media, we know that you guys comment. So that is very fun for everybody. I think you're going to like next month's episode very much. I just came out recording from them, as folks who will see this episode and the next one on YouTube will definitely be able to tell based on the setting behind me and based on my looks. I'm recording this outro for Emma's episode alongside the recording of her next month's episodes, because that's how podcast production works. And I can tell that the discussion was amazing. The discussion was great. So you're really going to enjoy next month's episode. Follow us at LanternPM on Instagram so you can get all the latest news, all the details. And if you want to subscribe to our newsletter as well, you can hit here on the episode links here. I added all our social media links, and I added as well the link for you to subscribe to our newsletter. Usually newsletter subscribers get some news ahead of time. And if you would like to contribute to the mission here at Lantern, and you can do so financially, there are many ways you can donate to us. And the way that you can get some perks in return is going through Patreon. So the link for Patreon is also here down on the episode description. And you can get many perks, and that include even maybe some early access to podcast episodes. If that's something you would like, just head over there and check what's going on. All right. We really appreciate any support. If you can do it financially, that's awesome. If you can't, and you can just share this episode and rate our episode, comment on the episode, or go to our social media and follow us there, that is also huge help. And we thank you very much for it. All right. I'll see you next month for a brand new Lantern Voices episode. Goodbye.